Before we get started with the interview, unfortunately, I did forget to turn on my camera for this interview, so that is my bad. But I still have the audio, so if you do watch the video version of this, you'll just be seeing Dr. Chojnowski, uh, who I deeply appreciate coming on and talking with me about these issues. But nevertheless, here's the interview. Okay. Okay, so this is Crime of Critique. I'm here with Dr. Peter Hornowski, and today we are going to be talking about the recent German schism that might have happened last month. And could you explain exactly what went down in the synod? Uh, because
Well, this
oh,
whole process that the Germans were engaged is basically an attempt by Francis and even before Francis to decentralize the structure of the church. And the German bishops have used um, this idea of the synod, this meeting of the local church, to address some specific questions and address them in a way that the answers will bring about revolutionary change. For example, the question that they were addressing in this synod was what to do about all the clerical abuse that had happened in the last few decades in the church in Germany amongst the modern clergy.
yeah.
And they had a report in 2018 detailing this abuse. And in 2019, they began this synodal process to, I would say, quote unquote, deal with the problem of abuse. And
Mhm.
of course, the solutions that they've come up with now in the last month, March, in the last meeting of the synod, were all revolutionary in the context of the Catholic Church. So you have things like the advice to the German bishops to, by this synodal process, to bless same sex marriages
Mhm.
and to end the celibacy of the clergy and to rethink and change the church's moral teaching on homosexuality and um, even getting into the question of women priests, that advocating the use of women priests in the future. So all these things, because of this problem, which was a real problem,
Mhm.
you have it as a tool to bring about this revolutionary change. Not just that they're asking the local bishops to come up with a totally new teaching and totally new practice on their own, irrespective of what the universal church is supposed to be doing. They also want this kind of revolutionary change that would totally change attempts to change the very doctrine of the church and the fundamental practice that has gone back to the early centuries of the Catholic Church. So it is a revolutionary process, but it's just a little bit. It's just the intensification of what you see throughout the institutional organization of the church itself, which is this constant push to shed the Catholic past and to sort of collapse to the pressures of the world and to uh,
Embrace modernism a little bit more.
embrace fully embrace modernism and embrace the moral norms, if we can call them that, of the modern world, which are so antithetical to the Catholic faith and Catholic religion.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's actually one of the points. Oh, what the synod you brought up is well, first the address of the clerical abuse going on in the church. I saw recently Pope Francis has actually tried to do something about it. I don't think it was related to the German synod, but he is going to try. he tried to address it back in 2019, I believe, actually, around that time, like you said. But it's apparently he's being a little bit more serious about it now. So maybe it has something to do with that. But the bigger issue, I think, for a lot of people would be the allowance of or blessing of homosexual marriages in the church, which has never been taught in, the 2000
Yeah.
years of the church. So
Well,
would if they were to fully endorse this, would this be an official schism from from Rome?
it would be it would be an official statement of heresy, and of course you'd be in schism with the Catholic Church of the ages. Whether what Rome says about it, the present occupants of the Vatican say about it, is another story. I think they would condemn it and yet subtly allow for it at the same time because of the people that we're speaking about. So, of course, it's a complete break with Catholic teaching on marriage,
Yeah.
and you're too young. You don't remember that it was a break with the fundamentals of law throughout the world up until about 10 years ago. So this is just a group of radical Germans who have the support of their bishops and cardinals, who are just forcing the church to adopt the most radical and anti-family uh, trends in the world. And it's really shocking, and it's abusive to the Catholic Church and to the Catholic faithful. And I hope the Catholic faithful will react in a very strong way, refusing such an abomination. But I think that that so many of those who call themselves Catholic have been uh, used to accepting the ways and the mores of the world, that there won't be a big uproar,
Yeah.
except on the part of a few, a
Yeah.
small percentage, and therefore we're going to have something introduced that we never thought would be introduced. But I remember this is the way that they introduced various things that we in the past thought were impossible to introduce into the Catholic Church. Like I remember in the 80s when they introduced, well, it was before, I'm sorry, in the 70s when they introduced communion in the hand.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking as well.
Most of us never, um, well, this was totally contrary to Catholicism, and so that was started in certain countries, and it became the regular practice. So Rome said, well, we'll just accept this because it's going on anyways, and we'll allow it. The same thing with altar girls, which we
No.
thought would never happen. John Paul II, even in encyclical, said it would never happen. It's totally contrary to the tradition of the church, and yet some places introduced it, and then Rome allowed it. Even John Paul II himself allowed it. And I remember at the time pointing this out, that it had been disallowed and then it had been accepted within a couple of years. So this is the ongoing process. People don't remember the church as it was, most people, but what
Yeah.
the church as it's going to exist in a couple years is going to be totally different than anyone who's 60, 70, 80 years old remembers it as being. It's going to be totally transformed. And you see this a bit at the German Synod and the various quote unquote artistic displays that went on. I don't know if you saw that at the St. Bartholomew Cathedral in Frankfurt.
No. Mm.
Artistic display, so-called in the cathedral. It was really a sacrilegious performance, sort of trying to symbolize clerical abuse, and it's really a disgrace. Our the most sacred things, the most sacred teachings, practices, morals have really been stripped away from most Catholics, and the authorities, um, who claim authority and who claim responsibility do nothing about it, because it continues. It
Yeah.
continues. It's not suppressed. So, but we have the responsibility to reject it and point out the errors of their ways and try to adhere to our religion as we know it should be adhered to.
Yeah. Yeah, with the whole it's starting to, getting to a point where they're starting to take drastic steps toward modernism, it seems like. And the German Synod, I think, seems like one of those things. But with the trad trad Catholic movement, it seems to be growing a little bit. Apparently the numbers have been over exaggerated a little bit. But the movement has been growing, um, but we still don't have, believe, as many bishops to support the more traditional, teachings of the church that would allow them to change back. So, do you think there's any like possible chance that we could ever go back to what was before and condemn these heresies?
Well, you're not going to go back in my lifetime, and I don't think in your lifetime will there ever be a return to the church as it exists in the 50s, which was a flourishing um, institution with continually growing in size and in faith, and with many converts and new religious orders, and a real intellectual dynamism that was very proud of itself and wanted to convert people. Now we have um, near complete loss of faith, because if we really look at the Catholic faith as it was prior to Vatican II, you can say that very small percentage of the even Catholic population, officially Catholic population, baptized Catholic population, has that faith. So we see a shrinking of the faith. People don't know the faith, and false ideas, heresies have been given to them. And I mean, they were given to me in the 70s when I was growing up. So
Yeah,
there's certainly
yeah,
by
I'm still with
now
them.
very few people know the faith, and therefore the practice of the faith declines, and you have smaller and smaller groups really who adhere to the faith and practice it. But Thaddeus, we really don't. That's not as important in itself, because every Catholic knows that the importance of the faith and the church is to save souls. Believe it or not, it's not to no. Believe it or not, it's to save souls, to get them to heaven, to be eternally with the Holy Trinity and all the saints and angels. That's the purpose of the church. It's not to stop global warming. It's not to end conflict and warfare. It's not to raise the economic level of the people, even though the real faith and the real morality of the church has always done those things, but they're ancillary benefits of the practice of the faith and the teaching of the morals of the church. They're goods that come from it, but that's not the main purpose of the faith and the moral teachings of the church. So I think smaller groups are going to benefit, but those groups are also going to find themselves under increasing persecution by those who are infuriated that any remnant of the old religion still remains. They're becoming they're becoming increasingly infuriated, and also they're trying to destroy whatever remains of the traditional idea of Catholicism. Like, everyone knows that Catholicism is connected to priestly celibacy,
Yeah,
and yet That's exactly what the German bishops, and by no means only the German bishops, want to eliminate. Ultimately, it's clear in the final synodal statement that this is the case. So the priestly celibacy, this sanctity of marriage between a man and a woman, that is directed towards the producing of children and the raising of children. Um, this is being attacked. This is being um, smeared, and
Yeah.
they're trying to eliminate whatever vestiges of this old civilization that still remain on the mental horizon, people's mental horizons. I mean, listen, that is the reason for the clerical abuse scandals is because way back in the 60s, they a huge part of the clergy and the baptized Catholics threw out the moral teachings of the church
Yeah.
and said, "Well, nothing's a mortal sin." I mean, I remember this ringing in my ear from friends, and all the way through the 80s. It's impossible to commit a mortal sin.
Oh, yeah, and also
Which me,
the ones are saying like hell doesn't exist as well.
right,
Those
right,
people.
right. Hell doesn't exist. I mean, that's almost universally held by most of the bishops, Francis himself, um, and most of the so-called Catholic population don't believe in this. Well, it's a teaching of Jesus Christ. It's a continual teaching of the church. But what would you do, Thaddeus, if you didn't believe hell existed?
But what I would,
Go for it. Go
I,
for it.
what I would do if I didn't believe hell
Go
existed,
for it.
I,
If it doesn't hurt anybody, go for it. If you give up that
yeah,
doctrine, which they have given up, and especially with this teaching of universal salvation, well, the moral, mental restrictions, the idea that I shouldn't do this because it's wrong and it could lead to my eternal damnation, if that leaves the mind of a priest or a cleric or a layperson, well, then of course you're opened up to all these perversions and
mm,
and pretty soon you're going to step on the civil law. You're going to cross the line with regard to the civil law,
yeah.
because you've long ago passed the line with regard to the moral law, the divine law. So it's not surprising if you dump morality. And listen, the Catholic Church has the strictest and most demanding morality in the world. And it is taught that, and it's the most, it demands the greatest sacrifice, and it's the one big reason is because we believe that marriage is forever
Yes.
till death. Until death, let me just say that.
Until death do us
Until
part.
death,
Yes.
yeah, it's a little extreme. Forever. No, we believe, according to Catholic doctrine, which no one can deny or a heretic, that marriage between a man and a woman, validly initiated, um, lasts until death,
Hmm.
and divorce is not possible. Uh, people, empire, countries were split away from the church because of that teaching. Nations were in uproar because of that teaching, and yet the church never stopped teaching it. It said, "Okay, the countries be in uproar. Okay, so if you want to do that, you leave. But we're not. We can't change the doctrine because it's Christ's doctrine." So, no, this is something, but it's sad that you don't have clerics on the scene anymore, or very few, who are willing to defend that sacred doctrine and uphold that reality. That we should have the leaders, the prime minister in Ireland, who's engaged in is having a same-sex marriage, quote unquote, with a male partner. This is Ireland. That
That's
means that the
yeah.
civilization built by the church is gone.
Mm,
And just like there's no forum anymore in the Roman Forum. All there is pillars and decayed buildings and ready to fall down. And now we're seeing one old pillar falling down and the next one falling down, and that's what you see.
Yeah, but
But
then we have things returning like the snakes in Ireland as well.
oh,
We
is
don't.
this are snakes coming back?
Yeah, apparently. Yeah, ever since like things you were talking about with
Right.
the Irish allowing the priests and the bishops in Ireland allowing the more liberal side of things in Ireland, the snakes have returned in Ireland.
Oh, is that
It's
right?
Yeah, and
Yeah. I mean,
it's very
Ireland's a
interesting.
Ireland's a perfect example because they started by focusing on the sexual abuse scandals, most all of which happened after Catholic doctrine, the moral doctrine, was ejected in the 60s.
Yeah,
They used that excuse of those scandals to introduce, let's just go through in a constitutional way through referendums, um, abortion, same-sex marriage. They got rid of their blasphemy laws
oh wow,
completely, and allowed for divorce and all these things. So a total rejection of the moral teaching of the church in Ireland. And as an expression of this, and as a visual expression of this, they also allow the bars to be open on Good Friday, the pubs to be open on Good Friday, and that was never the case. That they were always closed. But if
yeah.
Christ's death on the cross doesn't matter to a whole people, especially the Irish people anymore, well, then we're in serious territory.
Yeah, with that ends as well. I think it seems like the more post Vatican II churches, it's starting to act like some of these modern Protestant churches as well, with
Sure.
like adding the LGBTQ rainbow flag in front of the
Yes.
church, and some of the I don't think it's in America, but definitely in Germany and I think France as well, where they're actually putting it in front of the church, which is quite scary in a way.
Well, there was that famous, and I know someone who knows him and was in touch with him. There was that famous example of some pastor of a Chicago church which had the rainbow flag on the altar and hung it there. And then the new priest coming in, he took it down and had it burnt.
Oh,
Uh,
good for him.
and then he had to, and he was, guess who was condemned? He was
He was
condemned
condemned.
and had
Yeah,
to flee and hide for his life. He was hiding for his life. I lost touch with regard to what happened to him and what is going on with his story. But he had to flee, actually go into hiding because he had done that, and he was the one condemned. So that's not tolerable, and which shows you it's got to be the laity that really hold up the hold up the flag, if you will, for Christian civilization, and hopefully as many clergy and bishops um, get under that flag as we can probably as we can muster. But it's a small, very small army, if it
yeah,
exists. I think it does exist. It's a very small army, and it's fighting a huge foe that's been building and been organizing and been fighting for 67 years and even more. Modernist heresy, which really began over 100 years ago.
yeah,
Um, and that's been moving forward and infiltrating and taking over since then. So
yeah. Because that has to do actually with now we as Americans, we're in America, and we have this huge right versus left discussions. and obviously with the left, you got the LGBTQ stuff. Well, the thing is that the modern American conservative thinks that all this leftist ideology is only contained in America, and that's actually not true because you can see it with the modernization that's been happening in Europe, in the church, over there and around the world. So it's not just America. America would be probably the highest point at which that is happening, but it's also happening around the world as well, and we need to see that as well. So how would we go about, like, say, giving awareness to this stuff, and not just say, oh, these people have their own problems. Like, how is this connected to us as well?
Yeah, well, in America, we have the problem of that both parties have officially sort of adopted the rainbow flag agenda. And most political candidates, you see, the thing is, I remember when the Roe versus Wade opinion came down, and then all through I don't remember in the 70s very much, but in the 80s, the 90s, of course, there was a big movement amongst the people and yearly marches to overturn Roe versus Wade, and many bishops signed up and officially into this pro-life movement. Well, nothing similar has happened when after same-sex marriage was declared a part of the U.S. Constitution and a right under the U.S. Constitution by a Republican Supreme Court.
Okay.
Uh, none of that has happened, and
Hmm.
that's a problem. And that's because there was no immediate reaction. People instinctively think that it's a done deal, and that this kind of totally anti-natural ideology should be is a valid political position, and that we almost implicitly or tacitly admit that, oh, we have to accept, and because that's just the way things are now and you have to be tolerant, when it strikes at the very heart of nature. And I think we have to realize that we have to fight back, and
Yeah.
that we have to get together with our fellows who think the same in other countries in Europe. And so much can be done over the internet to try to rally opinion around this idea of the goodness of Christian civilization and how it should be restored. I mean, the ideas can be put out. You can talk to someone and be interviewed by someone in Ireland or in India, and have them follow you or speak to you and share ideas. And look at the Indian government, just came out against same-sex marriage. Officially Hindu party, and ultimately soon creating a Hindu state, perhaps. Uh,
It was also in Africa, right? I think it was
oh,
Rwanda. Oh, Uganda.
Uganda,
Yeah. Yeah.
Uganda, Uganda passed these anti-sodomy laws and anti same-sex marriage laws. So there are people whose fundamental religious view, or even philosophical view, is scandalized by this new trend. And of course, in Russia, they are very much against the dominance of the LGBTQ ideology and the
Hmm.
pushing it on to youth. And they've taken, they've made legislative efforts to forbid the pushing of this ideology in society. So, um, but of course, the mainstream media has the ability to label certain people and certain movements and certain nations as the bad guys and as retrogressive. And see, that's the thing. Ultimately, the left controls the narrative. And until you take the narrative away from the left, you're never going to win.
Yeah,
Uh,
you can't win the culture war when the media's
ultimately, you're
calling
going
you
to
things.
lose. Ultimately, you're going to lose. That's why it's a matter of mind, and it's a matter of history, and it's a matter of discussion, and it's really a matter of logic, and all that intellectual work has to be done to try to gain a new appreciation of the natural law, of
Mhm.
Christian civilization, and the goodness of traditional culture and civilization, and why it's not only why it's good in the moral sense, but why it furthers the flourishing of the human person, because it does.
Yes.
It does.
Yeah, because we've had now over 100 years of feminism in America, and I know there's a lot of, conservatives who say that feminism, the first wave feminists are okay, but those second and third waves, no, the first wave starting, in the early 1900s. I mean, suffrage, that was, granted women do have the right to vote, but it started with them, the founder of feminism, and what she had to say about it. And now we've had over 100 years of feminism and it has brought society as a whole no joy. And all this
No.
materialism and pulling away from Christian ideals and morals and ethics, it's it's driven this country apart. It's turned it into a materialist society. And there is, especially with the invention of social media and the internet. I mean, it's not in itself a bad thing. It's neutral, but people have turned it into something that is evil because of our materialistic viewpoints that we see. And it's it's striking that we need this country to turn back to its roots, what the founding fathers were, as Christians, for the most part. So it's we need that return.
It, it's going to it's going to take a lot of effort, and because we've given away a lot,
Yeah.
and we've failed in so many ways, mostly because of what I said before, is because we've lost the narrative and we've given the narrative to them. And what I mean by that is that the left has determined for a very long time what is progress and what is the human ideal, and what is human flourishing, and what is the best society. They've had the answers for that, and we've always, well, on the right, or the reactionary forces, if you can call them that, or conservative forces. We've always been on the responding end mostly, and fight,
We're always defensive. We're always
right,
defending.
defensive, and fighting really a rear guard action ultimately. So you need to take the initiative, but you need to. The biggest part is intellectual. The biggest part is intellectual, because you have to reimagine what a good society is by looking back at what was had. Saint Pius X said, we don't need, in his first encyclical, he said, we don't need to uh, create, castles in the sky, or totally new ways of existing, but we need to simply regain something of what we've lost, because we had a civilization. We've had a civilization. It wasn't perfect because man is not perfect. Man is fallen.
Mhm.
So, but we had a civilization, and the popes have always said we have to look back and try to regain the elements from that Christian civilization, which can be uh, operative in the present, which can be sort of revitalized in the present, and that's the work of the your generation.
Yeah, yeah.
Because we've been doing this for a long time, and but your generation is going to carry it for a long time, and probably during the critical time. So you could either lose everything and be in a totally unnatural, unchristian environment and world, or you could regain some critical, essential things that are essential for man's eternal salvation and for human flourishing. So, um, but it's a matter of thought too, and that's a commodity that you don't find very much of, like real thought, not just cheap thought, not just
Yeah.
responding to the moment, but real thought, and moving from not just inundating someone with ideas, that the latest in news, but
Hmm.
sort of thinking about the consequences of the news, or tracing back what's happening to an earlier stage, or showing the deep intellectual principles that are at the root of some of these phenomena, so that we see around us. So it's hard work, but people have got to start thinking and talking in a serious and intelligent way, and because we're humans and we're rational
Yeah.
beings, and we're not just butting heads like rams. So
Yeah. With the society thing, like they they say like any society is good except Christian society.
right,
And
right.
it's they'll even accept Islamic society as well. And so like, oh boy. But yeah, it's gonna be a tough road ahead for for my generation. But we people can change anything when they set their minds to it, and we definitely think it's possible in the future to do so. Yeah, I think that should be it. Thank you very
Okay,
much.
good. That's good.